Hello, all my joyful creators and all of my Longmire fans. Welcome to Funday Monday, part 25 of the Longmire Blanket. Today, we are going to finish creating the remaining 3 feathers that will go on our dream catcher. And if you'll remember from last week, I told you that for the very first time in this whole process, I am taking a little bit of control on the colorway of my project. In the past, I have rolled the die to determine the colors, or you guys have picked the colors. And this time, just because I wanted to control the colorway, just because realistically, the colors that we had chosen, you probably would not find a dream catcher like that. Meaning that, let me get my color card here. All right. So we had the colors peach, orange, green, teal, and red chosen for our feathers. And so I ended up deciding to go with the color that Jen chose, which is peach, and the color that Mimi Cat Do chose, which is teal, and I'm alternating those for my feathers. So if you want to go by what was chosen, then the next color for our feathers would be number 4, and Charlie chose the carrot, the orange. If you, well, that's what my number 4 is. Then the next feather was chosen by Viola, and it would be whatever your number 5 is. And then the last feather was chosen by Bree, and it would be whatever your number 3 is. So a little bit of politics there to kind of get through the beginning of this. But again, for this tutorial and for my blanket, I'm going to continue alternating. And I had the teal and then the peach, and then I'm going to do the teal, peach, and teal again. So again, this is your blanket, your masterpiece. You need to choose the colors that will make you happy as an artist. So, or a designer. So now that we have that out of the way, I'm going to remove all of this, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our 3rd feather. Now, if you'll notice, we have a little bit of a longer string so it can hang down a little bit further, as it would in a realistic dream catcher. So if you're ready, go ahead and get your string color ready. I already have mine on the needle. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So if you'll look at this last row on your dream catcher, you have 5 X's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to start our string right here in the very middle of that stitch, or that row. And we're adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, where before we were only adding 9, but we need this one to hang down a little bit further. So we're going to add 11 X's. So we're going to grab our work and go ahead and just get started right there, right up underneath that middle X. Remember, you want to make sure you leave enough yarn on the underneath side for a tail. And then let's go ahead and do our 11 X's. And there's 1, and 2. And now we're working on 3. And I want you to go ahead and pause the video and continue adding your 11 X's all the way down. Once you have 11, go ahead and fasten off that color and go ahead and put the color that you have chosen for this feather on your needle, and I will meet back up with you. So we have our string done for that feather, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to start working on the feather. So we're going to come right up underneath the last X we made for our string, and that's where we're going to make the X for our first color, for our first stitch on our feather. And again, you want to make sure you leave a long enough tail for weaving in. Okay. There we go. And I apologize for hitting the camera, and I need to adjust the tail on my yarn here. There we go. And it looks okay. There we go. All right. Now we're going to make the next one right here beside it. And remember, when you have a long tail, it tends to want to knot up, so you have to just be careful. And again, I recommend just trying to pull it through as slowly as you can. And then I'm also trying to make sure my little tail there stays out of the way. And there is our first row of our feather. So now we're going to start our second row, and we're going to come right up underneath the X we just made. And we're going to add a total of 3 X's to this row. My yarn is wanting to bunch up. I've got a lot of yarn to work with right now. And it's caught the tail, I can tell, as it's trying to peek through there. And again, as you remember working on the other feathers, once we get a little bit established, that tail will automatically kind of stay out of the way on its own. All right, let me just make sure everything is as it should be back here. And let me get my tail out of here. I'll bring it back through here. Okay. All right. Just making sure I've got all the yarn pulled through. And there's our first X. And we're going to work on our second. And then again, we're going to make 3 for this row. And there's the second one. And again, just making sure my yarn tail's out the way. And the third X for this row. And again, I went a little fast right there, so my yarn is wanting to bunch up. So again, the slower you pull it, the less likely it is to bunch and try and knot. And then this completes the third X. And I'm just going to fluff this side of my X before I move on. And there we go. And now for the third row, we're going to come right up underneath that same X we just made to start the third row. And my tail is caught up in it, so let me get that out. And I'm going to fluff this one more time. There we go. And we're going to do 3 X's on this row as well. So it is going to equally match the very last row that we did. And I'm going to pull it just a little bit slower. You can see there my little tail was starting to try and knot up. And just making sure is pulled all the way through. And then we'll complete this first X. And working on the second X. And I'm just going to pull it slowly. And it's always it's always good to make sure you just check the back before you go on to the next stitch, because as you could see, I thought I had it all pulled through and some of that excess yarn had created a little bit of a knot, so it was not. And had I gone a little bit further and made a couple more stitches, I would have had to frog that to go back and get that out. So it is a little time consuming, but oh, how pretty it is making our blanket. And this completes the second X. And again, making sure everything's pulled through, and it is. And now we're going to start the third X. Little fuzz. And let's just make sure it's all pulled through. And it is. And I'm just going to pull that tail back through. And now to finish up the third X. Okay, and now we're going to move on to the next row. And on this row, we're going to add 4 X's. And we're going to start by going out 1. All right, so we're going to come right here. And again, we're going to slowly pull our yarn through. And we're going to check. And now we're working far enough down, as you can see, whoops, as you can see, that our tail is now starting to stay out of the way. Okay, and let's continue making that first X. And again, we're going to have 4 X's. So when we finish this row, because we made this X 1 out, then our X's are going to end evenly, falling underneath this X as it has been. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, and 4. right. And let's complete that second X. And we're going to move on to the third X. Got my yarn twisted up. Oops. Okay. I've really got my yarn twisted up. So let's fix this really quick. And I do apologize. I'm trying to work around the camera, looking at the computer, making sure that you're seeing what I'm doing. So a lot of things I have to keep my eye on. And finishing up our third X. And now our fourth X. And I'm going to come back and try to fluff this one just a little bit, the third X. There we go. And finishing our fourth X. And I'm going to tell you how to do the next 2 rows, and then we're going to pause the video and work on those individually, and then we'll come back together. So for the next 2 rows, they're going to be worked the same way. You're going to come out 1 X here, and we're going to put a total of 5 X's on our row. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ending right underneath this X here. And then we're going to come back doing the same amount. So we'll start here on that next row and do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video, and I will meet you after you've completed those next 2 rows. It's really hard to see with this teal color through the camera. When I'm looking at it directly, it's a lot easier to see. So I'm going to bring the chart in to help you out with the next couple of rows. So as you saw, we've got 5 stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've come out 1 from that previous row. So here we are. Let me grab my needle so I can show you. We've just completed these 2 rows here. So now I'm going to help you look at what to do next, and we're going to pause the video and work on it. So we've just completed these 2 rows of 5. So now we're going to do a row of 4, and we're going to start right here underneath this last X we've made, and we're going to do 4 so that we come in 1. We're going to kind of create this little curve in our feather here. Okay, so we're going to do 4. We're going to do that row 1 more time. So we'll have 2 rows of 4. So 1 and 2. Then we're going to repeat our 2 rows of 5 again so that our feather comes out again just a little bit, just like we did here. and then one more row of 4, just like we did these. So I want you to go ahead, and all of these stitches are going to fall underneath each other. So we're going to do 2 rows of 4, 2 rows of 5, and 1 row of 4, and then we'll come back together. So go ahead and pause the video, do your 2 rows of 4, 2 rows of 5, 1 row of 4, and I will meet back up with you when you get there. So after we have completed our 2 rows of 4, our 2 rows of 5, and our 1 row of 4, we're going to finish the feather by adding the tip, and that is to do 3, 2, and 1. So let's go ahead and work on our 3, and we're going to come right here up underneath this last stitch that we just made. Make sure I'm in the right hole, and I don't think I am. Nope, I was not. Okay. And so we're going to only add 3 X's to this row, so we will have 1 less or in from the previous row. And this is completing the first X. And now the second one. And with each stitch, our dream catcher is coming more and more alive. Not physically, but its personality is growing. And there's the second X. And now our third one. And completing that third X. All right, and now we're going to add 2 X's to the next row. So we're going to come in 1, just like that. And I'm going to pull that out just a little bit, fluff it up there. There we go. And completing the first X. And now the second X for this row, which is also the last X for this row. And my tail. Okay. I'm going to come back and fluff that. And let's complete it. And then we have just one more row left. We're going to add 1 X on it, and it will be the very tip of our feather. All right, and we're going to come in 1. Well, trying to get it lined up, but I'm going to fluff this one here because it's disappearing a little bit there. There we go. All right. And now come in 1, and we're going to make our last X for this feather, creating the very, very tip of the feather. And there we go. And there is our completed third feather. Oh, that looks so nice. All right, so go ahead and weave in your ends on your feather. Go ahead and get your string on your darning needle for the next feather, and I will meet back up with you when you get there. My feathers look so much better off camera than they do on camera. But anyway, I hope yours are coming out to your liking as well. So now we're going to go ahead and get started by adding the next string. And so you have this long line or row on your dream catcher. We're going to start our string right here in this first space from that row. So let's go ahead and get our string attached here. And of course we want to make sure we leave enough of a tail for weaving in. And this time we're going to go back to the original amount of X's, and we're only going to do 9. And there's 1, and 2. And so I'm going to have you go ahead and pause the video and keep working on creating your 9 X's down for the string for this feather. And when you get 9 completed, I will meet back with you and we'll go ahead and work on this feather. And it does. Looks like my tail got caught up in there. And there we go. All right, so go ahead and work your 9 X's and I will meet back up with you. So we have our string made. I've gone ahead and weaved in those ends and fastened off, and I've got my next feather color on my darning needle, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And this feather, the first stitch is going to start out just underneath the string, so we're just going to continue right there below the last stitch we made in creating our string. And again, I'm going to give myself enough yarn to weave in at the end. And we're going to actually create 2 stitches for this row of our feather. And so there is our first stitch. And I got a little bit of my hair. We don't need that, so we'll get that out. And I'm going to make sure my tail is up out of the way, and it is. And we're going to complete this first X, and then we're going to come right beside it to complete the second X. And I'm trying to keep this where you can see it. And this is going to complete our second and final X for this row. The next row is going to mirror the one we just did, so we're going to come right up underneath that last X that we just made. And we're going to make our first X. And then right beside it, we will make our second X for this row. And then for our next row, we're going to have 3 X's on that row. And we're going to come out one for our first X. And then our second and third X will fall right underneath the 2 X's we made on the previous row. Again, I'm trying to do my best to keep this where you can see it. Make sure my tail's up out of the way. And there's our first X. And now our second. And our third X. All right, so after you completed the row of 3, you are going to do one more row just like that with 3. So go ahead and pause the video and work your 3. So you have 2 rows of 3. So you'll have 2 rows of 2, 2 rows of 3, and we'll come back and we'll start the next row together. So here we are, we have 2 rows of 2, 2 rows of 3. Now we are going to add a row of 4. And to do that, we're going to come out one from the previous row, and we're going to do 4. And so here is working on the first X. And I can see my tail's trying to get caught up in that. All right. And our second X. Oops, got caught up in there. Oh, okay, hang on. I'm making a mess. And then this way. There we go. Okay. And now let's start our third X. And our fourth X. And this will complete this row. And after we finish this X, I'm going to get the chart. And we're going to look at the next couple rows. And then we'll pause the video and work those rows individually and then come back together. So there we go. We've got 2 rows of 2, 2 rows of 3, 1 row of 4. And let's take a look at our chart. So here we are. We have our 2 rows of 2, our 2 rows of 3, our row of 4, and now we're going to come out 1 on the next row and do 5, and we're going to do that for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. So I want you to go ahead and come out 1 and work 5 and do that 4 times, 4 rows of 5, and then I will meet back up with you. So go ahead and pause the video and get that done. And I will meet back with you when you finish that 4 rows. We are back. We have completed our 4 rows of 5. And now on the next row, we're only going to do 4. So we're going to come right here up underneath this last X that we made. And we're going to start our first X. And we're only going to do 4. So we'll come in 1 from the previous row. And there's our first X. And working on the second X. And the third. and the 4th. And on the next 2 rows, we are going to make 2 rows of 3. And so we're going to come in 1 to make our 3. And so I'm going to let you go ahead and pause the video and work these 2 rows of 3 on your own. So here we are finishing the first X. And so go ahead and complete the last 2 X's for this row, and then you're going to mirror this row on the next row and also do 3 X's. So when you get that done, I will meet back up with you and we'll work the last 2 rows together to make the point of our feather. And I'm going to just go ahead and finish this 3rd one here with you since we're right here at it. And so the next row, you will just repeat what you've just done and do 3 X's right below each one. And I'll meet back up with you. And on this next row, we're going to add 2 X's. So we're going to come right underneath this last one we made on the previous row for our first X. And here is 1. And then 2. And when we finish this row, on our last row, we're only going to make 1 X for the point, and we are going to make it right underneath this last X we just made. And this is going to complete the feather for this one. And here is our feather. Oh, that looks so nice. All right, so go ahead and pause the video, weave in your ends, get the yarn on your needle for your next and final string, and I will meet back up with you. Okay, so to start our last string, if you look at your long row here of X's, at the base of it you have 3 X's, then you have 3 here, and then you have a row of 4. It is at the end of that row of 4 that we are going to start our string. And as before, we're going to make 9 X's down. And there's 1, and then right below it we're going to make the second one, and we're just going to keep going until we have 9 X's, one beneath each other, to create our string. So go ahead and pause the video and do your 9 X's for your string. Go ahead and fasten off and weave in your ends and get your next feather color ready, and we'll come back and we'll complete our 5th and final feather. All right, so now to get started on this feather, we've got our color, and we're going to come and start right here underneath the same X that we left off from our string. And make sure I'm leaving a tail, and I'm going to try to hold on to it. And this is the only X that we are going to make on this row. And of course, working with all this yarn, it wants to get tangled up. All right. There we go. And the next row, we're going to make 2 X's. So we're going to come out one this way, and then we're going to make the second X right underneath the one we made on the previous row. And on the next row, we're going to make 3 X's, actually for the next row and the 4th row. And we're going to come out one this way. Trying to leave it where you can see it. And then the next 2 X's are going to fall right below the X's from the previous row. And then we are literally going to mirror the next row from this row. So if you want, I'm going to have you go ahead and pause the video after we finish this row and make one more row exactly like this row, and then we'll come back and we'll work on the next section, the main body of the feather. And this is completing that 3rd X. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and make one more row of 3 X's right below each one of these, and I'll meet back up with you. Okay, so we have our row of 1, our row with 2, and then our last 2 rows with the 3 X's. And for the body of this feather, we are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of 5 X's. And so we're going to come out on each end from the 3 and do an extra X to create the 5 X's. So I'm going to leave you to that. So go ahead and pause the video again, and you're going to make a row of 5 X's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. And when you have that done, we'll meet back up and we'll work on finishing up the point of this feather together. We now have completed these 5 rows of 5 stitches, and we came out 1 on each end to make the 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so now we're down here, and to finish off our feather, this next row, we're going to add 4 X's to it. And we're going to start right here underneath the last one we just did. And we're going to add 4 X's to this row. And so here's working on the first one. Trying to make sure I keep this where you can see it. And now the second X. Making sure I'm keeping my beginning tail out the way. And the third X. And then the fourth X for this row. And after we complete this fourth X, we're going to move to the next row, and we're going to only do 3 X's on that row. And so moving on to that row, we're going to do our first X right here underneath the last one that we just completed on the previous row. And so working on that first X. And the second X. And then we're going to do the third X, and that puts this row in 1 X from the previous row. And here's the third X. And then after we finish this, the next row and the row after that, we're only going to be putting 2 X's on. And that completes the third X. All right, so for the next row for the 2 X's, we're going to start with the first one right here underneath the last X we made in the previous row. And so working on that first X. All right, and then the second X. And when we finish this X, as I mentioned, we're going to only do 2 X's on the next row, and we're going to mirror the row we just completed. So our 2 X's will go right here underneath the 2 X's from the previous row. And then after that, on the next row, we'll just do 1 X, which will create the point of our feather. And then our feather will be done. And finishing up this second X on this row. And then on the next row, we have 1 X, and we're going to go in 1. Getting the right hole here. And the X is going to go underneath this one. So in 1. And this is going to complete our feather. Oops, making sure that's the right hole, and it was not. And there we go. There is that last feather. So, all right. So take a minute, weave in the ends for this feather, and fasten off, weave in your ends, and then we're going to come back and look at the whole dream catcher with the feathers complete. So I will meet back with you in just a minute. So here is a look at our dream catcher. So we have the body of our dream catcher, and now we have all of our feathers hanging from it. So that completes today's episode. Next week when we come back together, we are going to create the strings on the inside of our dream catcher that are going to look kind of like this. So I am very, very excited. So that is it for Funday Monday today. So I thank everyone for coming by and hanging out and working on your blanket together with me. And until next week, be joyful, stay crafty in your own way, make your own joyful creations, and I will see you next Monday to put in the inner working of our dream catcher. Bye, everyone.